Our speaker today, Garrett Evans, is a program officer and facilitator with Gender Equity and Reconciliation International and received a Bachelor of Science in Conflict Resolution from Portland State University. He began practicing in the Zen Buddhist tradition in 2011, spending 2 years in full-time residency and training at a monastery in this tradition. Garrett has since maintained a daily practice of meditation and silent prayer and discovered a deepening love for the world's great contemplative traditions. He first encountered Sathyana Institute's work in 2014, and particularly through their Gender Equity and Reconciliation and Dawn of Interspirituality projects. He feels called to bring together his contemplative practice with healing in the world. And so let's warmly welcome Garrett for the first time he's been speaking here at Unity of Vancouver.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for that warm welcome and for the beautiful, beautiful music. It's very touching. And so we've just done this meditation on the longing in the heart and kind of tracing that through our lives. And so I'd just like to share a little bit of my story, of my own journey with prayer and meditation, and a bit of a kind of spiritual biography, if you will. And so if I look back on my own life, I was raised in a fairly liberal Episcopalian Christian tradition, going to church every week. And now when I go to church, I love the music and the kind of worshipful atmosphere that's there. But as a kid, it was just kind of something I did. My parents went, and so I went. And I didn't find myself particularly spiritually inclined as a child. It was just kind of going through the motions, and I never really thought about it until I was 15 or 16 or so, and then I really started to question some of the things I had been taught. Kind of starting to come into my own as a person and wanting to find my own path forward. And so I started to question and challenge some of these beliefs, and at first this was very enlivening and liberating in a way, that I was breaking out of something, and it was like there was an inflow of new possibility, that maybe the world wasn't what I had thought. But over time, and particularly as I kind of dispensed with religion and spirituality, and as this happened, a certain kind of sadness or even bitterness came in, that I had somehow lost the ground I was standing on, and I wanted to find some meaning that was more than myself, but I couldn't accept a religious or spiritual path forward. And at the same time, as much as I was a kind of would have identified myself as a materialist atheist, when I looked forward into the kind of worldly paths that were set before me, I also correctly sensed that I wasn't going to find what I was really longing for there either. And so, particularly as I came into 17 or 18, kind of standing on the threshold of adulthood, and started looking forward into my life of what is this life going to be for me, I started imagining myself going down all the different paths that were set before me as options. There's what I'd been prepared to do, to go to college and study math or science or what have you. And it was like every path that I could imagine forward, it somehow felt like a dead end to me. And so I was in this place of stuckness and of kind of a crisis, of longing for something more, but not finding it. Myrtle Fillmore, she writes, always within us is a longing for something higher, an unrest, because we are not satisfied with life as it seems to us. It is that within us which wants something more than the outer activities of life. We never shall be satisfied until we find ourselves. It is this restlessness that accounts for all the error we find in the outer. Our restlessness represents a power that is crying out to be expressed. And so I was in this place of longing for something, but not having the words for it. And it was terribly, terribly lonely to be in that place. Because I look around and everyone around me they have some path that they're starting off on that they seems like it's for them. But none of that felt right for me, and so I felt terribly alone and almost like nobody could reflect back to me what I was really feeling in my heart. None of the kind of outer forms seemed to satisfy what I wanted. To quote Rumi, he says, "You say, but I spend my energies on lofty enterprises. I study jurisprudence and philosophy and logic and astronomy and medicine and all the rest. But consider why you do those things. They are all branches of yourself. Remember the deep root of your being, the presence of your Lord. Give yourself to the one who already owns your breaths and your moments." And so I somehow sensed that all these paths were studying the branches, if you will, and what I was longing for was to study the root. And so I was in this place of crisis. And one day I was at the bookstore and I saw on the shelf this book, The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching by Thich Nhat Hanh. And I picked it up and I brought it home and I started reading it, and something in it just grabbed me. Because there was this promise that there was some other way of being in the world that wasn't so caught up in itself and conflicted and constricted. And so something in this just grabbed me. And it also spoke to the kind of restless longing I was feeling. You know, the first noble truth of Buddhism equates egoic existence with a kind of dissatisfactoriness. And that I was so feeling that it spoke to me, and it gave this promise that there's some other way to be. And so I was taken by this, and I started to meditate every day and started to read more. And especially in the beginning, those first few months, it was something I was really doing in private, in secret, because it felt so deeply personal and private, almost like it was the first genuine thing I was really doing. I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I was doing it because I felt this calling towards it. And so I wanted to protect that from people's judgments or what they might think. There was a real kind of tenderness to it all. Anais Nin, she talks about something very similar. She says, "And a day came when the risk of remaining tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom." And so that was the kind of tender first steps for me on the path. There was a kind of riskful, tender opening to something else. And so I kept practicing, I kept meditating, I kept reading, and I started having this feeling that when I'd read these teachings, it was like there was something in them that I didn't understand, but that I could feel the depth of. And it just fueled this longing of needing, there's something I don't understand about how to be, And so it just fueled this longing for something. And so I kept meditating more and more. And then out of this longing, this thought came to me of, I need to go and live on a monastery. I need to go live on a monastery and really see what this is about. And again, I kind of kept this to myself in the beginning. Almost like I was testing it. I wanted to see if it would go away or if it was really something real. And over some period of months, it just kept coming. It kept coming, and I kept feeling this. And so eventually I decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go live on a monastery. And so I started looking for a place that would take me, I wanted a place that had a lot of sitting, a lot of meditation, a lot of time in silence and in retreat, and also a place that would take some 18-year-old kid they had never met before. And so fortunately enough, I found such a place. Excuse me. And so after graduating high school, I went to live at this Zen Buddhist monastery. And I really threw myself into the practice there. There was this kind of desperate longing that I wanted to figure out. And so I was kind of sitting as much as I could. Every spare moment I had, I was in the meditation hall. And there was already, a fairly rigorous schedule, waking up at 4 a.m, and every month, a week-long silent retreat where we could kind of sit as much as we wanted. And so I was really diving into this with a kind of desperation. It's like I had this genuine impulse to reach for something larger than myself, but the only way I knew how to relate to it was this kind of striving, struggling, grasping for something. If you're familiar with the Zen teacher Adyashanti, he was here last year giving teaching, and he talks about coming into spirituality as a young man, and he says he was trying to storm the gates of nirvana. And so that's very much how I was, this kind of overzealous, gung-ho Zen, some part like desperate earnestness mixed with naivete. And so that's how it was for some period. Trying to conquer the mind and attain the truth in some way. And of course, part of the challenge of this is if you've ever tried to meditate, it's not so easy to quiet the mind. There's a saying, you can't use the mind to conquer the mind. But this is what I was trying to do. And so while I wasn't so much attaining the kind of inner quietude and stillness that I was longing for, I was mostly faced with the chaos and struggle of my own mind, almost like being at war with my own self. And that's how it was for probably the first year and a half of this striving, struggling, and nothing I did, none of my strategies that I had, none of it fulfilled this thing I was longing for. No matter how much I efforted or pushed, or no matter how much I sat, none of it was attaining the new vision I could sense was possible. And so this was a very challenging period. But then somehow something started to happen. If I look back, I can see that this was kind of a period of purification, or of exhausting a certain kind of self-willfulness. And so that self-willfulness was being burnt away, but that longing in the heart was still there. And so something something started to change. And I don't quite know how to say exactly what it was, because it happened so secretly within myself that I wasn't even aware it was happening. But I'd find myself going to the zendo, to the meditation hall, to sit, and not trying to attain anything or get anywhere, but almost like I was just sitting for its own sake, or offering myself on the cushion. There was this quality of kind of silent, wordless prayer. And as I sat and offered myself, it was almost like there was a response from some greater presence that filled my heart with this kind of wonder. And so this was more and more what my practice became. It was almost like sitting in the midst of a great faith. The Sufis, they talk about they call the circle of love, that God pours him, herself into creation, into being, and that somehow through love, through the devotion of our hearts, when we offer ourselves back, it completes a certain circle of love. And so this was a period of really opening to something new. There's a Sufi teacher, Irina Tweedy, from the Naqshbandi tradition, and she writes very beautifully in her autobiography about something very similar. She says, "And so it came. It tiptoed itself into my heart, silently, imperceptibly, and I looked at it with wonder. It was a still, small, light blue flame, trembling softly. It had the infinite sweetness of a first love, like an offering of fragrant flowers with gentle hands, the heart full of wonder and stillness and peace." And so this was really a new beginning for me in the whole spiritual path, that this kind of devotional self-offering had been awakened inside of me. And it's something that still really lives in my heart and in my practice. My practice feels much more now like almost a kind of prayer than meditation, because of this attitude of devotion. It shifted my orientation from one of striving for a kind of spiritual attainment towards one of kind of self-giving as a spiritual offering. And so this is something that still lives in me. And something it's awakened is a real love across the world's traditions. Because when I read the great mystics of any tradition, I can almost feel this kind of devotional essence that infuses their words, and it just inspires this deep love in me, like what I spoke about before of reading something and feeling its depth and truth, even if it's beyond what my heart has realized at that time. I can feel the depth in it. And so I'd just like to come to closure with a passage from Rumi. He says, "There is one thing in this world which you must never forget to do. If you forget everything else and not this, there is nothing to worry about. But if you remember everything else and forget this, then you will have done nothing in your life. It's as if a king has sent you to some country to do a task, and you perform 100 other services, but not the one he has sent you to do. So human beings come into this world to do particular work. That work is the purpose, and each is specific to the person. If you don't do it, it's like a knife of the finest tempering nailed into a wall to hang things on. You say, but look, I'm using the dagger. It's not lying idle. Do you hear how ludicrous that sounds? For a penny, an iron nail could be bought to serve for that. You say, but I spend my energies on lofty enterprises. I study jurisprudence and philosophy and logic and astronomy and medicine and the rest. But consider why you do those things. They are all branches of yourself. Remember the deep root of your being, the presence of your Lord. Give yourself to the one who already owns your breath and your moments. So may we all remember the root of our being. May we each do the work that has been given us to do. And may we each give ourselves to that one who already owns our breath and our moments. Thank you.